Está valendo. Boa noite, good evening. How's it going, everybody? Very nice to have you all here. Caio, you just got in at the exact same moment I was starting the recording here. So you got the exact same second that we started the class officially. All right, guys, it's very good to be here. José Cauã, Douglas, Rayane, Felipe, Rodolfo, Aline, Guilherme e Caio. The 9 of us will be talking about very interesting topics here, and the kind of topics that we should discuss more often, both in the academy and throughout, professional life. We talk so much about ethics. Toda hora no Brasil a gente está indignado com questões éticas, com escândalos, com comportamentos inadequados, seja de um magistrado da mais alta corte, seja de um presidente, seja de todos nós mesmo no dia a dia. And we don't talk enough about honesty, dishonesty, ethical and unethical behavior. So we should talk about those things, okay? And behavior economics has lots to offer to this discussion. Now, let me get a glimpse here on how many of you have had the chance to at least take a look at that documentary that I shared with you through WhatsApp. Quantos de vocês que tiveram, pelo menos ali, a chance de dar uma olhadinha naquele documentário sobre desonestidade que eu compartilhei com vocês lá no WhatsApp? Deixa eu ver. Rodolfo levantou a mão. Opa, pelo menos um. O José Cauã confessou. Olha aí, tá vendo? Honestidade. Meus alunos são honestos. Não tem medo. A gente não vai aqui punir honestidade de maneira alguma. Pessoal, esse assunto é muito legal, viu? É muito, muito legal. E tem uma mensagem muito interessante. Sim, tá aberto para assistir, tá? Eu acho que sim, tá, Aline? A última vez que eu testei, o link estava funcionando. This is a very, very interesting topic because, there is this thing that many times we see companies and we see big scandals, like absurd situations, people becoming billionaires by stealing money from another or from others and things like this. So we see those all the time. A Aline está dizendo aqui que vai assistir no final de semana. Digo, eu abri, está nas abas que consumirei no fim de semana. Legal. It's very good, it's not like a study time. You don't feel like you're studying. You actually feel like you're having an entertainment or something like that. The topic is a hard one, right, when we talk about dishonesty. But it turns out that this is much closer to what we think is the human behavior in general than most people expect. Então, o que eu quero dizer assim, a gente costuma achar que pessoas desonestas são pessoas, né, completamente desprovidas de caráter, de dignidade, de não sei o quê. E a gente não faz assim uma espécie de uma leitura mais cuidadosa de como que cada um de nós está sujeito a certas derrapadas e essas coisas acabam acontecendo mesmo com pessoas que a gente considera relativamente boas pessoas. Pessoas boas também fazem coisas ruins. Não me levem a mal, tá? Não entendam errado, não. Tem gente safada nesse mundo. Ou se tem. Não estou dizendo que todo mundo é bonzinho, não. Mas tem gente boa que acaba fazendo coisa errada. And that's what we want to discuss too, We want to talk about this. How good people end up doing bad things. And sometimes they have good justifications for that. Many other times they don't. But we are going to talk about a little bit more about that tonight, okay? So let me share here my screen with you, as always. And let me kind of pick up some of the things that I believe you guys already have in mind, okay? So please confirm to me that you can see this unethical decision making in an organization, the screen from the film that we watched the other day. Can you guys see it? All right, I see you can. Okay, so we started this whole thing talking about this this fable, this very old story. Sometimes people think it's like a kid's story for kids to go to sleep or something like that. But it turns out that this is a much more interesting story than we have in mind initially. So that fable was published in 1837. One may ask if this is outdated. Is this outdated? I mean, is this out of touch with nowadays? Então tem lá um rei, só para a gente lembrar, tem um rei que acaba sendo enganado por caras que descobrem que o rei é muito vaidoso. Então a vaidade acaba sendo uma fragilidade do rei. E ele, os ladrões, né, os bandidos, eles identificam que existe uma longa estrutura hierárquica, que uma pessoa obedece a outra, que obedece a outra, que obedece a outra, então tem uma cadeia hierárquica ali. E eles descobrem que se eles enganarem uma pessoa nessa cadeia e disserem para ela que ela não gostaria de ser vista como sendo estúpida, as pessoas têm vergonha de levantar questionamentos, ficam constrangidas de dizerem o que realmente pensam. So, this story, it's not outdated. I mean, it is old, but it is about human society in general. So it tells us lots of interesting stories. And no, it's not outdated. The second question you may ask, well, let's take a look at this with what aspects of individual behavior help explaining the story. Então, que tipo de aspectos do nosso próprio comportamento individual que acabam ajudar a explicar aquela história, né? De o rei acabar saindo pelado, saindo nu numa procissão lá, achando que estava vestindo um tecido super especial que só as pessoas inteligentes eram capazes de ver. All right, so the first thing I already told you, it was vanity, right? Now, the second thing related to vanity is pride. People are afraid of recognizing their own mistakes or the fact that they have limitations. People are afraid of showing that they have some sort of limitation. And we all do. We all are a little bit short-sighted for some aspects of analysis, right? So, I mean, there are many individual aspects that explain the whole story. But we want to pay attention to the organizational aspects. So think about it. Do you think it is just a coincidence that in the story they mention the prime minister, then they mention the king himself or the emperor himself, then they mention the guards, then they mention, like different levels of authority. So this thing is not a coincidence, They're trying to explain to you that many times the structures of an organization may somehow expose it to some sort of problems, some sort of issues. The structures may become a sort of vulnerability. Então, a estrutura de poder, de autoridade dentro de uma organização, algumas vezes pode se tornar uma vulnerabilidade. And we're going to talk a lot about that tonight, okay? So let me just get some of the elements that I want you guys to pay attention in this story, okay? So it looks like a simple story, The Emperor's Tale, but we can find many aspects that can be typically found in modern organizations too. So, first one, people trust excessively routines. They put excessive trust on routines. We are all subject to group pressure, conformity. Do you guys know this expression, conformity? Let me write this here. Conformity. Is there anyone here that could help me out and try and explain what conformity means? Pode falar em português, inglês, alemão, francês. What do you think conformity means? Conformidade. Okay, so you're translating this to Portuguese, but what
Eu
sense?
pensei em conformismo, talvez.
No, it's more like conformidade. So what is conformidade? What we're talking about here? Seguir algo já estabelecido. Exactly. But mostly you end up following something that you just observe other people doing. And you don't even question that, right? So conformidade is one of the most powerful forces driving people's behaviors. Imagine how many things we do because other people do. Other people also do. So we have this kind of group pressure. We don't want to look awkward. We don't want to look different. We are not comfortable being the only one having a certain opinion. So it's very hard for us to think independently. And you can tell when you see people there think independently because very often other people say that they are a pain in the neck. Quando você encontra alguém que tem um pensamento independente, a maioria das pessoas tendem a achar que aquele cara é chato, que aquele cara é um pé no saco. Teria um pouco de viés de confirmação, professor? Yes, I think there is some sort of relation to confirmation bias, but it's kind of a different nature, you see, because confirmation bias is an individual aspect of human cognition. And when we're talking about conformity, we start believing stuff because other people do. So let me give you an example here, one that is controversial. Okay, so you may disagree. Remember, I'm trying to say that thinking independently is a good thing, okay? Se você quiser discordar de mim, pode discordar, tá? Tem problema não. But let me tell you this story. As soon as President Lula got in the presidency, as he took office, right? As soon as he did, he started talking that the interest rate started saying that the interest rate was too high and that he could see no good reason for such high interest rates. Now, one day asked why he only started asking those questions after he took office. But no, forget about that. But as soon as he took office, he started saying the same phrase like this: Eu não vejo nenhuma razão para os juros estarem tão altos. All right, so President Lula started saying that. Now, in days, in a couple of days, I had already heard the same exact sentence in the mouth of like there's rates are so high. All right. So this was the first wave. Now, a month or two passes by, and then here comes President Lula and says something like this. I don't know what this citizen is doing over there. And when he uses this expression, it's almost like he's trying to to avoid saying something bad about the president of Banco Central. So he said, eu não sei o que esse cidadão pensa que ele está fazendo. And then lots of people raised a little bit the how aggressive they would comment on this person's behavior. So it looks like people don't stop and think, wait, is this nice? I mean, is this okay? Uh, do I agree totally with what the president is doing? Now, don't get me wrong, okay? I voted for Lula. I have nothing against him. I'm just trying to tell you the sequence of events and how people are starting feeling that they are authorized to say the same things because someone else did first. And as many people start saying those things, it becomes real. It becomes a truth. No one questions that thing anymore. So, independently, if you think the interest rates are high or low or too high or they should be right there, it amazes me how often one important person says something and many other people start saying exact same thing. So it looks like you have to be loyal. Oh, if someone that I like, that I admire, said something, well, it must be true. And if I say the opposite, I'm just, uh, ungrateful, or I don't know, I'm disrespectful, or you see. Now, but let me move to another example that is closer to us. Let me ask you this question. What happens in this class here if one of you starts raising your hand and asking questions every 2 or 3 minutes? O que vai acontecer numa sala como essa aqui, ou numa sala presencial, em que um colega de vocês começa a levantar a mão e fazer perguntas para o professor a cada 3 ou 5 minutos? What will happen? Well, depending on who is the professor or the teacher, the thing can get ugly. Some teachers don't like that, don't like to be questioned. They say they do, but it's not true. They don't want someone questioning what they are saying. They feel uncomfortable, and if they are insecure, they become aggressive. As pessoas que ficam inseguras quando a gente está fazendo perguntas, elas tendem a reagir com agressividade. Okay, but that's not the main point. I'm asking now, what do you think will be the behavior of the colleagues, of the other students? How would you react if a colleague of yours started asking questions every 5 minutes? O que vocês acham que acontece? Nada? Come on, guys. I need some answers. Será que vocês estão com medo de falar? Pode falar, Aline, diga lá. O Caio falou que ia ficar irritado.
Talvez.
Go ahead, Aline.
Talvez alguém pudesse dizer, espera o professor terminar, anota aí tuas questões, deixa para o fim. Ai, espera um pouquinho, deixa de ser chato, baixa um pouquinho a mão, a gente quer escutar o professor, não sei, coisas do tipo, talvez.
A mesma linha que a Aline, o José Cauã falou aqui, ó, há uma insatisfação. O Caio disse que ia ficar irritado. All right, guys, I know. It can be annoying. And I mean, annoying people it's very hard to tolerate, right? What I'm trying to say is that that's not the appropriate behavior in a class. Everyone knows that. And if someone diverges, if someone adopts a different behavior, people tend to outcast that person. They tend to ask them to stop, or they look with, very serious to them and say, come on, give us a break, or something like that. So we are all in an agreement that is almost invisible. We have like tacit agreements. A gente tem acordos tácitos. A gente entra num ambiente, a gente vê qual que é a regra. E se alguém diverge daquela regra, todo o grupo vai contra. Now, this is not an individual trace of human behavior. This is a collective, a social bias. This is the kind of a social bias. And still, it is connected to our brain, obviously. But what I'm trying to say is that, do you think such a behavior had any good explanation in the history of mankind? Vocês acham que essa tendência que nós temos a aderir a um padrão de comportamento e não aceitar quando algum membro do nosso grupo está adotando um comportamento muito divergente, vocês acham que esse tipo de situação tem alguma explicação boa na história da civilização humana? What do you think? Oh, come on, guys. It made perfect sense when we were living in a tribe, right? If you have to escape like wild animals, we don't want people diverging. We have to work in groups. We have to follow the same path. We have to be together and stick to one another. If we have independence, too much independence, we all die. If you are in the African savannah, you don't want people to be independent. You have to work in groups. You have to have this kind of conformity. Everyone will behave the same way. Everyone will sleep at the same time. Everyone will wake up at the same time. Those made perfect sense over the 300,000 years that we lived in the African savannah. But not anymore. We are not anymore in the savannah. And somehow we still carry those features, those behaviors. So, conformidade, essa pressão a agirmos no conforme, dentro do comportamento considerado normal, é muito, muito forte. É muito forte. É uma das forças. There's this other, the very idea of fashion, it's like this, right? Fashion has a huge element of conformity. If people are using some sort of jeans, that's okay. Oh, the jeans have like huge rips, it's open, you can see people's knees. And I don't know, a couple of years ago, you would look at that and you would ask the person, will you go out with that jeans? But then all of a sudden, it's fashionable. And if you don't have ripped jeans, people will look at you and say, oh, you are square. You know nothing. This is cool. The other example is like this one I could observe very closely. Some 5 or 10 years ago, not so many people use long beards. They all of a sudden it became cool. I don't know, maybe because of Globus soap opera or something like that, or some famous singers started using those beards, and all of a sudden it's cool. And lots of people start leaving their long beards, and that's it. So, I mean, people's preferences change so fast that you can imagine how this thing is. Like everyone's starting doing something, and you have to do that too. All right, so there's a good deal on this thing on organizational behavior too, okay? But sometimes we have even stronger forces at play. We have group pressure. Some people will come to you and say, shut up, we want to watch the class. So it's going to be like aggressive. You have embarrassment, you know. Obviously, we have arrogance, ego, we have social disapproval of stupidity or incompetence. I mean, if someone is ignorant about any fact in a group, people laugh at him or her. And why is that? I mean, if you don't know something, it's not your fault. But people laugh at someone that is not aware of some rule or something like this, right? All right. So this is one of the most important things, guys. When we're talking about the behavior inside organizations, we have to remember that organizations are made of people, and people will express those feelings, those tendencies naturally or sometimes imposed by the group, okay? Now, the second point that we want to talk about here is narrow framing. Remember that idea? Framing, enquadramento. All right, let me give you a hint of what we are talking about here because this is very, very interesting. Narrow framing goes like this: I will take care of my part. Whoever is responsible for something else, oh, that's not my job. I will only look at my job, only my task. So suppose that you work in a factory and this factory is producing some sort of equipment. And your task in the factory is to polish some metals, okay? You're supposed to polish the metals. They they come in, like in a stream, you have to polish metals, pieces of metal, okay? Now, later on, you discover that the factory produces guns, rifles, and those rifles are sold to, I don't know, to a dirty war or to uh, gun traffickers or something like that. You see, you may look at your task and say, oh, I'm just doing my job. I need the money, and I'm here just doing my job. But some people may look at you and say, come on, how dare you? You work for those guys and they are selling guns, to overcome democratic leaders, to promote wars or something like that. And you say, oh, I don't care. I'm just doing my job. Same thing if you work in a company that produces cigarettes. All right. Yeah. Oh, I don't smoke. And I hope my kids don't smoke. But here, I'm just an accountant. I'm just doing my job. I don't care about what the company is doing. You see the problem that we have there? What is the problem that we have there? Qual que é o problema com esse tipo de comportamento, gente? Alguém gostaria? Qual que é o problema de organizações em que as pessoas estão focadas só na sua atividade particular e não importam o que acontece antes da sua atividade ou depois da sua atividade ou na companhia como um todo? Elas estão falando, não, eu vim aqui para fazer essa parte. O resto não é comigo. What's the matter? What's the problem with this kind of thing? Well, yeah, I mean, still, you could have cooperation, João. You see, even if that's the case, you still have cooperation because, if everyone takes very good care of his or her part, the things will go smooth. Eu não estou dizendo que assim, a pessoa deixa de me entregar os materiais no tamanho cortado certinho, ou que eu atraso a entrega para o próximo cara fazer a montagem. Não, as pessoas estão colaborando. Mas o meu ponto é assim, qual que é o problema de eu focar apenas na minha tarefa específica e não ver o painel como um todo? I like José Cauã when he said something like disconnection. Caio also said, people stop looking at the bigger picture. Aline, perde-se olhares. Yes, that's good, guys. But the real point that you guys are trying to reach is this. We are not responsible. We are not liable. We don't have to ask ourselves if that is the right thing to do or not. If we focus on a single task, we don't have to think ethically. We are authorized to forget our moral obligations. As pessoas entram dentro do ambiente de trabalho e elas deixam na porta de entrada a sua postura ética. Falam assim, não, eu vim aqui para fazer uma tarefa. A minha ética, minha moral está lá fora. There was this series, I think it was on Apple TV, I don't know, but there was this guy, it was a series that someone would get in the company and he would forget everything about his own life when he was inside the company. And when he left the company, he would forget everything that happened inside the company. I think it's like Divided or something like this, the name of the series. Have you guys heard about this? Tinha uma série, né? Eu acho que era na Apple TV, que era assim, propunha isso. Claro que era uma ficção científica, mas os caras tinham uma maneira de bloquear a sua memória. Na hora que você entrava na empresa, você esquecia tudo que aconteceu antes de entrar na empresa. E aí você trabalhava lá. Na hora que você saía da empresa, você esquecia tudo que tinha acontecido enquanto você estava dentro da empresa. E aí, obviamente, você não sabe o que você fez. Oh, this is science fiction. Okay, yeah, I mean, it's not true. But it's like to provoke some reasoning, some concerning, and say, is it right that when we get into a company, we leave our ethics at the doorstep? Is it okay? Oh, there you go, Douglas. That's the name, Severance. Yes, é esse mesmo o nome da série, Severança. Divisão, né? Severance seria como se fosse partição, alguma coisa assim. Tem alguma coisa de muito errado, gente, quando a gente entra numa empresa e a gente finge não entender a natureza daquela empresa e para que ela faz e tal. So let me give you another example, okay? This is a personal example. My dad and my older brother, for a long time, they owned a bar. They had a bar in Belo Horizonte, in Minas. And they made money out of people drinking too much, basically. You may say, oh, come on, people are having fun, people are, meeting each other, everyone needs a break, and things like that. Yeah, a bar is a good place. But if you look at how much money they made, more than half of the money they made was of people that would drink too much, that shouldn't be drinking that much. So then you may ask yourself, do you want to own a bar? Será que você gostaria de ganhar o seu sustento a partir de pessoas que estão bebendo muito mais do que deveriam, fazendo mal para a sua saúde, se colocando a sua saúde em risco e alguns deles correndo risco de desenvolver adição, né, desenvolver vício por causa daquilo? Some people would look at this and say, oh, come on, Luis, give me a break. It's nothing at all. You're just doing your job. But we have to ask the question, no matter if their answer is, it is okay. My problem is we should ask the question. I don't care what your answer is, but we should ask those questions, right? Do you agree? Please raise your hand if you agree with me. All right, Aline, João. I'm not gonna be hypocritical here, guys, but I have to say this, okay? We all need the money. We all go to our jobs, work for our bosses, and we try as best to do things right and to get into the good side of the company and to grow inside a company, right? We all want that. We want success, we want money, we want to prosper. That's it is not wrong. The problem is when companies establish that in order to grow, you have to shut up. If in order to grow, you have to stop thinking and stop talking what you actually think, then we have a problem. And oh boy, do we have companies like this? Well, it turns out that the majority of them, it is like this. Sorry. Let me just drink some water here. Just a second, please. Yeah, this is bad news. I'm sorry to inform you guys that, more than half of the companies, in order to prosper, in order to grow, you're going to have to stop saying what you feel like saying. Oh, this is a good point, Aline. Yeah, I know. Money is some sort of energy, but you know what? What also is some sort of energy? It's engagement. It's how much you get yourself out there. You get involved with the challenges of a company, you see? Engagement is also some sort of energy. How much attention you pay, how much actually involved you are. All right. So there's this big problem called narrow framing. What we do in companies, we split the tasks in so many parts, and people cannot see the whole. They cannot get a panoramic view, I don't know, a larger perspective. It's very hard to have this larger perspective. So, this is one of the huge problems that we have. And by the way, you guys know where I'm going with this, right? If we have narrow framing, you know what happens? Good people may participate in very bad things. Yeah, I mean, this is the question, but I mean, as soon as you split the process in so many parts, sometimes in different companies, I'm just the provider of this, I know, input, and the other guys are doing what they have to do. I have nothing to do with that or something like this, right? So you can either split the tasks in different sectors of the company, and sometimes you split the companies, and you are working in a company and don't see the whole supply chain. Who is buying that stuff? For what those products are used and things like that. And you don't participate in ethical decisions because you're just doing your job. Yeah, João, you got it right. You see, you guys are starting to realize this is not like a distant problem. This is happening in every single company, in a university like UFRPE, sometimes in a classroom, on the way people share their papers, their group tasks. Uh, Aline is kind of sad here. Kyle is saying, well, I would say that sometimes we are coerced to act against our values in order to survive. That's exactly true, Kyle. And looks like you already have seen our next slide. But yeah, take a look at this, okay? Um, Many times our behavior is based not so much in survival, as Kyle said here, but in fear. We just are afraid that we may not survive. Sometimes our life is not at risk, but we feel like it were, okay? So we have fear of people's judgments. We have fear of how we are going to be seen, how we are going to be interpreted, how people will judge us, right? Now, then we have this expression here that I will come back to it many times, which is strong contexts, contextos fortes. What are strong contexts? Well, those are contexts that can be stronger than reason. Você obedece a um determinado contexto, independente da sua razão dizer para não fazê-lo. All right. So then you have this coercive element that Kai was talking about, okay? Now, the other things that we also have in that story, that children's story, we have authoritarian leadership. We have people who smartly take advantage of all of those situations. So somehow we are vulnerable as a society because of all these things together inside most of the companies. You see, uh, once in my life, I kind of had um, this better tolerance to questioning big corporations. I would look at big corporations and say, these guys are evil. These guys are just there's too much greed. I don't know. People don't care about social issues. They just don't worry about their country and things like that. But when I started studying things like this, I realized that we are talking about a much more pervasive problem. This is not about capitalism. This is about the human experience, regardless if you are in a capitalist society or if you're in a socialist society. You know why? Because the same very things you will see in a socialist country. Exactly the same things. So it's not so much the problem of capitalism and greed over reason, over social issues. It's more like the way humans organize themselves, regardless of the sort of society we are talking about. But then again, don't take my word for it. Let's keep looking. Let's see if you guys later on will agree with that. Let's not jump into conclusions so early, okay? All right, so let me talk to you about three things here, or at least be more specific about them. Those are very interesting concepts, okay? First one, I know for some people it's going to be hard to swallow, okay? But yeah, give me a break here and try to listen, okay? First one, it's called ethical blindness. So, do you think that there may be some situations in which you simply cannot see the morality of it, the ethical aspect of it? Você acha que pode haver alguma circunstância, situação em que você, sei lá, não enxerga, você fica cego, cegueira ética. Você fica temporariamente incapaz de observar aspectos éticos de uma decisão. Well, when we study those scandals, and if you watch the documentary that I mentioned to you, the truth about lies, the truth about dishonesty, if you watch that, you're going to see that many people, after something really bad happens in their lives, after that, many people would say, I just couldn't see. I, I mean, you may not believe me, but I couldn't see how bad was that thing that I was doing. So yeah, it happens. Okay. I know it's hard to tell when people are, just smart to say that they couldn't see. They are just trying to take advantage and saying that they were ethical blind for some time. I see. It's hard to tell who is telling the truth, right? But many people have come with the same affirmative. Afterwards, some very big scandals happen. They say, I just couldn't see. And we are going to have an example of this later on in this class, okay? So, ethical blindness is this temporary inability to see ethical aspects of a decision, many times due to strong context, group or peer pressure, time pressure. Sometimes you just have to run too fast and you don't have time to react, to stop and think. What happens is that people deviate from their own values. Most of the times, it is something that happens in a specific context. When they leave the organization, they will not act that way. And the third part is that it is unconscious. Now, okay, I understand. You may look at me and say, come on, Luis, not totally unconscious, right? I mean, even when we do something thinking that it is okay, a little bit we are afraid that that was not a good decision, right? Será que agir de forma antiética é possível que seja totalmente inconsciente? Well, it's hard to tell, but we call ethical blindness this inability to see the ethical aspects. And what characterizes ethical blindness is these three things. We do things that we wouldn't do. Second, we only do that thing in a specific context. And third, we don't realize it. We don't realize how bad it is, or at least like this, okay? All right. So this is what we call ethical blindness. There are very good studies about ethical blindness, mostly in corporate scandals. I can give you guys later some hints on papers and material to read, okay? But yeah, we have studied that for some time now. The second thing we talked about here, the strong context, right? So there are three levels of strong contexts. First one is a situational context. So it's just like, the people around you, the time, and timing of decision. You have to make quick decisions. And this is like, occasional. Then there is organizational contexts. So let's say when we split the tasks and we are all in a hurry and we all keep saying how bad is the competition, we have to win. So then it may be like something that you can see throughout the organization in different sectors. Everyone is kind of, in the same boat trying to beat the competition or something like this. Sometimes you have incentives to behave in a way specifically. And then we have like, sorry, then we have like institutional contexts. Then when we say institutional here, something larger than the organization, okay? Vamos lá, gente, vou falar isso em português para não ficar confuso. A gente pode ter contextos fortes que são ocasionais, que são da situação, as pessoas que estão em volta de você naquele momento, ou o tipo de pressão de tempo que você tem naquele momento. Então, vem e vai. A gente pode ter contextos fortes que são organizacionais, e aí você tem uma estrutura, uma decisão, alguém planejou que aquilo fosse daquela forma dentro da organização. And then we have institutional, contextos institucionais. Então, institucionais que vão além de uma única organização. A gente está falando de cultura, de normas sociais, de hábitos que são compartilhados por toda uma comunidade. All right? Just a second, please. I think I'm going to have to drink a little bit more water. There we go. All right. So, do you guys understand these 3 different levels? Let me give you an example of this. The situational context. Suppose that you are just in front of this train, or I don't know, this subway, and you have to make a decision very quickly. And you can see that the light is already on, saying, please don't walk in the subway right now. And you see that the subway is almost start moving, but it still can get in. Então, não sei se vocês já tiveram numa situação como essa, mas você está na frente do metrô, já começou a soar lá a sirene, dizendo que é para não entrar, mas a porta ainda não acabou de fechar. Você vê a chance de pular para dentro. Aí você fala, eu vou. Ou então alguém te puxa, começa todo mundo a correr, você vai também. Você não tem tempo de pensar se aquilo ali era bom, se era ruim e tal. Você pulou para dentro, estava todo mundo indo, você foi. All right, so this is situational context. Now, organizational context, I have a very good example for this, and it is Ambev. Já ouviram falar da Ambev, né, gente? Uma das maiores fabricantes de cerveja do planeta. All right. In that company, they have incentives for people to work in such a way that when you leave the company, you feel like, whew, I don't ever want to work here anymore. I've heard this from people who has been inside, who have been inside. They say, it's crazy. It's a competition that, you can trust no one. And that is stimulated by the company. Então, imagine você trabalhar numa empresa em que há um estímulo às pessoas competirem entre si. Quem perder, perde o emprego. Quem ganhar, é promovido. So, this is not accidental. Someone planned that to happen, okay? And the third one, institutional context. It's like when you're talking about beliefs of that whole community. So let me give you an example. It's not about ethical behavior, but it's okay. And if you're talking to people from TI, from technology, there is like an ethos of TI, you see? People respect, for example, authorship. Se você trabalha em TI, sabe que uma coisa que pode acabar com sua carreira é se alguém pegar você usando o trabalho de outros. Existe uma ética comum ali que fala assim, não, você usar o trabalho de outro, você tem que citar ou você tem que pedir autorização. Você não pode roubar o código do outro e usar de alguma forma. Todo mundo que trabalha em TI sabe isso. Todo mundo aceita isso. Se a pessoa não fizer aquilo, ela não é uma organização. São todas as organizações que trabalham assim. All right, so then we have like institutional aspects, when it involves values that are shared by the whole community, okay? All right. So we have these 3 sorts of strong contexts. And finally, we have cognitive frames, we have talking about that narrow framing, the way we restrict your view to a certain aspect of your job, and you just don't see everything else around you. Okay. All right. So these are the three concepts that we need to understand the case that I'm going to show you next. All right. So let me go back here to the presentation and move. Ah, oh, by the way, conformity has been studied as a category of social biases. So you have like a number of biases that are considered social bias, not individual bias, not simply cognitive biases, okay? So we have availability cascade, you have some collective beliefs that gain more plausibility throughout repetition. Remember, I told you the story about Lula saying something about the interest rates, and you see so many people repeating that you don't question it anymore. We have the bandwagon effect, efeito manada. We have the tendency to give an opinion that is more socially correct. So sometimes people look at you and say, "So Luis, please don't tell me that you are gonna speaking against Lula tonight." And you say, "Well, no, I'm not gonna speak anything against Lula, but I mean, I have my questions." But you see, if I have an opinion about someone, I shouldn't be afraid of saying that my opinion was such and such. But sometimes you don't want to cause any sort of conflict or things like this. All right, so I'm not gonna go over all of these social bias, but please take a look at those later on. Okay, I want to tell you this story. Okay, the story of this car. You can see there a story of a car exploding. Now, the name of this car was produced by the auto company called Ford. Então, é uma empresa que teve fábrica no Brasil durante muitos anos, né? A Ford. And this car, the one you are seeing, it is actually kind of a version of a car that has been produced and sold in Brazil over the 70s and 80s, ok? Tinha uma versão desse carro, que lá nos Estados Unidos chama-se Ford Pinto. Tinha uma versão desse carro aqui que, obviamente, não usou o nome Pinto, né? Se você fosse vender no Brasil um carro com o nome Ford Pinto, ninguém ia comprar. Aqui ele chamava Corcel. Olha só a diferença, né? No caso, um pintinho, né? Porque ele era pequeno. Aqui a gente deu o nome de um alazão, de um garanhão, um corcel, um cavalo. Na verdade, era uma versão desse carro, não era exatamente a mesma coisa. All right, so let me tell you about the story. This car was designed to compete against some very, very fierce competitors that the American auto companies were having. Okay, basically Japanese cars. So over the 70s and during the 80s, the number of Japanese cars that started being sold in America, the number was increasing so fast that many of these American companies just panicked. You see, they had to do something to compete because the Japanese cars, they were not so good, they were not so comfortable, and they were not luxurious as the American cars. But they were small, they were extremely reliable. I mean, they wouldn't break. You buy a car, a Japanese car, and 10 years later, you still have a car. You buy an American car, and 10 years later, you have half a car. You don't trust your own car 10 years later. But if you buy a Japanese car, yeah, there's a good chance you will still trust the car. I mean, to have a long trip or something like this. Então, os, os fabricantes americanos estavam em pânico. O carro dos japoneses era mais barato, era pequenininho, não era luxuoso, não era tão bonito, mas era extremamente confiável. Não quebrava nunca, você podia. Enfim, o carro era bastante resistente. So they said, well, we have to compete with these guys. We have to create our own version of these small cars. Let's do that. Okay. So Ford's best choice to compete against Japanese cars was this one, Ford Pinto. But it turns out that after producing hundreds of thousands of these cars, Ford realized and was informed that there was a problem in the design of this car. Essentially, if you had a collision and the collision was from the back, there was a good chance that the fuel tank would explode. It was not always. I mean, it was not like deterministic, but there was like a predictable uh, probability that this thing would happen. Okay. So they realized that there was a problem and they started studying this problem. Now, you have to remember that over the 70s, we didn't even have like safety belts. We were not so much worried about collisions. We didn't have collision tests. I mean, some companies would, but they were not supposed to. There was not a law saying that the auto companies were supposed to test the cars for collision before they sold them. Não havia uma lei, não havia uma atenção ao problema da segurança. E quando um acidente como esse acontecia, tinha uma grande chance das pessoas atribuírem a culpa ao motorista. Ou talvez à circunstância, à sorte, o azar, a velocidade que a pessoa estava, a temperatura da pista estava muito quente, enfim, alguma coisa assim. So, it was not like obvious that the company was making something wrong, okay? But then again, the number of accidents like this, they became larger and larger, and these guys had to make a decision. So they created a team to study the problem and to look at it from an engineering perspective. So what happens here? How can we avoid that? How much will it cost for us to fix the model so that this thing will not happen? All right. All right. So the engineering started working on this, and they had many discussions. They raised up some points, some technical points, and they were discussing this. At the same time, people who got caught in fire like this, they started suing, or sometimes their families started suing, taking Ford company to courts and say, oh, you were responsible for this. You have to pay. You have to somehow pay for the damage that you caused to my family, to my, I don't know, some losses of lives. So things became serious, like suit and discussions in courts, okay? Now, here comes the point, the main point. The engineers were already able to tell how often the problem was to happen. Okay, so they calculated the probabilities and they said, okay, 1 out of 20 collisions, if such and such and such situations are present, the car will explode. And in terms of probability, this is 0.05% or something like that. So they calculated the probability of the problem happening. And at the same time, they looked at how much money would the judges tell the company that it was supposed to pay. And then they said, okay, let's make some calculations here. They said, how much does it cost to fix this problem? Oh, yeah, we're going to have to do this and this and that. and the car will tend to be a little bit more expensive. So we're going to spend such and such amount of dollars. The car will have to be raised. Its price is going to raise up to such a number. All right. And we're going to have to spend this money. On the other hand, they said, how often the accident occurs again? Oh, it's 0.05. How much does the court tells us that we have to pay? Oh, it's $200,000. So let me multiply and see which one is more costly. So, as I tell you this, it may come to you as no surprise that these guys made the decision based on numbers. They just looked at the figures and they said, well, here we can fix the problem and we're going to spend, I don't know, $2 million. Here we're going to pay the damages and we're going to spend $1.5 million per month or something like that. And they said, yeah, let's keep going. For a moment, you may have already realized that these guys were not taking into consideration that some people were killed by those accidents. Some people were severely burned in those accidents. And they would remember that for the rest of their lives. So it is not about the money, but the decision that they made was fundamentally based on money. Now, when you listen to a case like this, sometimes it's very easy to jump to the conclusion and say, these are mean people. This is greed. This is capitalism. And this is, like, this is bad people. These guys are, But it turns out that the same guys who made those calculations, those were people who would come out of the company and give money to charity. They would participate in volunteer work in their communities. They would go to church every Sunday and pray, and they would teach their kids to be responsible, to be honest, to keep your word, to do all the right things. But when they were inside the company, somehow they couldn't realize, they couldn't see how bad a decision and how opposed to what his or her values were, those decisions actually were. Okay? So, I mean, you may buy it or not, but it turns out that one of these guys, who was like one of the most famous executives in auto industries in history, this guy later on, after you know all the lawsuits, after his career finished in the auto industry as a MBA professor, he would tell right away. He would say, "I couldn't see it. You may believe it or not, but when I was in the company, I simply could not see how bad a decision I was making." Some people say, "Oh, yeah, it's easy to say now. You were not killed, nor your brother, your sister, or your son, and now you can say that you couldn't see." But the guy would be as frank as he could and said, "I know, yeah, you may not trust me, but that's what happens, and you're gonna see many good people like me doing something really bad like that if we don't talk about these issues." So his point was like, I don't care if you blame me or not, but we have to do something about that because it's going to happen again. I'm perfectly sure that good people in my position will make the same decision. Then you have a point, right? I mean, if you're just trying to save your your soul, yeah, come on, you can say whatever you want. We don't trust you. But if you are worried about what's coming next, and the guy would say, look, if we don't do something about this, it will keep happening, regardless of who is there. It may be like a saint. if he goes in there, he's going to do the same thing as I did. So then you can say, all right, we have a problem here. What do you guys think? O que vocês acham? Vocês acham que esse cara era um hipócrita? Estava só tentando salvar a cara dele? Ou você acha que ele realmente tinha um argumento forte? Quem gostaria de começar? Eu preciso ouvir a opinião de vocês.
É complicado, porque fala de moralidade e tal, mas ele estava lá para cumprir o papel dele também, né, economicamente falando. É complicado, realmente é complicado. Mas não sei, eu acho que ele não era uma pessoa ruim.
Pois é. O que eu acho que o argumento que é mais importante é o cara prever. O cara fala assim, você pode pôr a seleção que for, fazer todo tipo de teste anterior, vasculhar a vida pregressa da pessoa. Se o processo lá dentro tiver aquelas coisas que a gente discutiu aqui, você tem enquadramento estreito, que você tem pressão dos pares, que você tem pressão de tempo, você tem uma competição muito forte na sua garganta, não pode parar para pensar, você tem que correr atrás. Se você tiver com a sensação de que é nós contra eles. E ele falava assim, se você, qualquer pessoa que estiver nessa situação vai fazer a mesma coisa que eu fiz. Não importa, não é uma questão de virtude. É uma questão de você estar sujeito a um ambiente em que você é conduzido, você é levado a fazer daquela forma que depois você vai reconhecer como desumana. All right, so let me just show you some comments here. So, for some people, this story is a symbol of cold-hearted application of profit maximization, actually, of cost-benefit analysis. The points that we have to keep in mind is this. First, the cost of fixing the car was smaller than the estimated cost of a financial compensation. I'm sorry. It was larger. It's written here that it's smaller, but I'm sorry. Let me fix that. The opposite. The cost of fixing the car was greater. Sorry. Greater than the estimated cost of financial compensations. So it was cheaper to compensate people than to fix the project. Second point, the production went on even after accidents became frequent. Então, mesmo depois que já eram previsíveis o número de acidentes graves, esses caras continuaram fazendo. From a conventional view, it is just bad people doing bad things. But Dennis Goya, so this is the name of this guy, Dennis Goya himself later on was surprised at his own misinterpretation of facts and his incapacity to consider ethical aspects. So he alleged that he was ethical blind. Oh, by the way, the recall team had a clear standard operating procedure to identify callback cases. Os casos de recall, né, que você chama o carro de volta para consertar, tinha lá uma regra. Só quando tivesse tais e tais probabilidades e tais gravidades que você chamava, começava a anunciar publicamente que você tinha que fazer um conserto no carro. E esse acidente, ele estava ali embaixo um pouquinho do limite estabelecido arbitrariamente para dizer que você tinha que fazer um recall. Então, as pessoas falaram, não, deixa para lá, toca o barco, vamos continuar com esse mesmo. Now, the other things that, just like details of this story, first, several engineers, none of them seemed to understand the gravity of the issue. So, it was not only Dennis Goya, Esses caras tiveram reuniões com salas cheias de 10, 15 pessoas e as pessoas não viam o problema. Ou se viam, tinham medo de falar. There was this pressure to produce fast and they could not raise the price at all. If the price was a little bit higher than $2,000, oh, this is like in the 70s, right? Obviously. If the price of the car was raised a little bit higher than $2,000, they wouldn't sell one unit because the competing price was this. O preço dos carros japoneses, nenhum deles era acima de $2.000. Havia até um ditado na indústria lá: safety doesn't sell. Segurança não vende. Você dizer que seu carro é mais seguro, ninguém vai escolher comprar seu carro por causa disso. Obviously, this was in the 70s, right? Later on, safety became a huge issue, okay? All right. The so-called crash tests were not mandatory. Only 7 years later, the government decided to make that a law, you see? So it was not necessary to have crash tests of new models. This explosion was usually seen as a low probability risk. Pinto was Ford's only small car, so there was no plan B. And they were all immersed in this culture of us versus them. Nós contra eles. Come on, guys, look at this. Sometimes you are in a soccer field, and just because a fight starts, you simply look at who is in our team and who is someone else's team, and you take sides. So we are animals. We work like this. And this ideology of us versus them, it explains a lot, for example, polarization in Brazil nowadays. De um lado, você fala assim, não, aqueles caras ali são fascistas, imprestáveis, ninguém ali... Né? Do outro lado, você fala assim, não, aqueles caras são comunistas, eles querem tomar o poder, destruir tudo que a gente tem de bom. So, we don't accept self-criticism when you are in a fight like this. It is us or them. You have to choose. There's no middle ground. So this is a real problem. If this thing gets into a company and the company thinks that they are at war with the competitors, well, in a war, you can do anything. There's no right and wrong in a war. There is winners and losers. So, with all this tragedy, the case ends up with 500 people dead. And most of the times, people believed that the accidents were driver's fault. It was some problem of the streets, or people were driving too fast. It was very unlikely that people would point the fingers at the auto company. What do you think about this case, guys? Give me your opinion about this. O que vocês acharam dessa historinha, pessoal? Eu não sei quanto a vocês, mas eu acho essa história fascinante. Eu consigo ver claramente como uma organização pode ser montada para evitar que pessoas boas enxerguem o que realmente está acontecendo. E aí os escândalos que vão acontecer depois. I have seen so many times, and you guys have seen too, when someone is caught doing something wrong, it's very often that people would look at you and say, I'm not that monster that people are saying that I am. You see, many times you hear this exact phrase. Muito comum as pessoas pegas fazendo uma coisa muito errada, muito criticável, e as pessoas falarem assim, eu não sou esse monstro que vocês estão apresentando aí. eu realmente fiz isso aí, eu confesso, mas aí começa a dizer o mais. Mas a pessoa não se reconhece no ato que ela mesma praticou. So, this is a problem, and behavior economics comes and say, yeah, this is not only bad people. You're gonna see good people involved in very bad things for a very long time, until we try and fix organizations. Se esse é um comportamento normal, infelizmente é um comportamento muito normal, Aline. É muito previsível. É praticamente 99,9% da população vai fazer as mesmas coisas. Now, let me just finish this class with some kind of, positive feeling here, positive word about this. Do you think there is any way a company can work on routines to avoid things like this? Você acha que tem alguma forma de uma empresa introduzir rotinas na sua vida, na sua operação, para evitar que desastres como esse aconteçam? What do you say? Is it possible? Can anyone guess what kind of routine we could introduce so that we wouldn't have things like this? Existe, gente. Existe, tá? A gente está falando aqui de boa governança. So yeah, we are talking about governance. We're talking about compliance. This is a huge issue. Kyle started with a very good idea here. External audits. Exactly. Então você precisa ter auditores externos. Mas aqui também vem um outro problema, porque auditores externos, muitas vezes, eles não revelam tudo. Eles vão lá e fazem impacto para assinar, dizendo que está tudo bem. Então, a existência de auditores externos é uma movimentação na direção certa. Mas eu vou colocar para vocês aqui uma expressão que vocês vão adorar aprender. Só para a gente terminar essa aula. Whistleblower. Whistleblower. Alguém já ouviu falar nessa expressão? Whistleblower. O soprador de apito. Ok, so we have whistleblower policies, que a gente deveria chamar isso de proteção ao denunciante. Programa de proteção à testemunha, programa de proteção ao denunciante, programa de proteção... Tá, então, uma empresa que se preze, uma empresa que está preocupada com esse tipo de problema, ela vai lá e fala assim, nós temos uma espécie de um ombudsman, nós temos um auditor externo, que ele pode ser procurado anonimamente por qualquer empregado que desconfiar de qualquer coisa errada na companhia. E se essa pessoa anonimamente entregar uma informação importante, essa informação não vai ser discutida por ninguém na hierarquia, vai começar a discussão lá em cima, lá entre os sócios e o conselho de administração. A discussão não vai ser interrompida aqui pelo chefe do denunciante. A coisa vai lá para cima, e enquanto a discussão não tiver sido toda esclarecida, ninguém nem imagina revelar o nome do denunciante. All right, so this is like you have to create the mechanisms from which the company will protect it from herself. The company has to protect it from itself, I'm sorry. Because we are all people and we are all inclined to make mistakes. And sometimes we just don't see where is the ethical line and we just go over it. So we have to protect people who take the step and go there and point the finger and say, there is something wrong here. I will not participate. So these things should happen not only in Brazil or in America or in Europe, these things should be like a standard procedure in any company. And unfortunately, I have to tell you that we are very far away from this point. All right, guys, just let me finish here. Just show you that if you like this story, you can learn a little bit more about ethical behavior in organizations. The course that we discuss here, the one from Palazzo and Hoffridge, it is freely available at Coursera, and I have taken that course, and it's worth it. Okay, if you guys want to have a chance, have a look at this. It's very, very interesting, and I know you guys will like it. Questions before we stop? All right, then. I will stop recording here, and I'm going to be here for a few more minutes if you want to talk to me. Otherwise, enjoy your Friday. I'll see you next Wednesday, okay? Take it easy, guys.